everyone. Welcome to HR Tech Talks. I'm so glad to have you here with us. I am Ben Eubanks, your host, and looking forward to another fun conversation today. Goodness, we were having fun in the warm up for sure, and it's going to be incredible. I can't wait. Just to give you a quick heads up. Hey, out there, if you're watching this live, so glad to have you here with us. If you're watching this recorded, watching it later, on demand, all the fun ways you can say it these days. Hey, glad to have you with us. So looking forward to a great conversation. As always, feel free to throw your comments, your questions, just chime in, say hello, let us know where you're connecting in from. It's always fun to see where everybody is. I, as always, am representing Huntsville, Alabama, and we'll find out from our guests in just a moment where they are located. Just a quick teaser for this before we dive into the conversation. Talking to someone from Sour.com, David Turetsky. We're going to dive into what's changed, what hasn't. We're going to dive into some of the priorities that should be on your agenda. They may not, you might have to clear a couple things off of there and fit it onto your to-do lists after this conversation. So I'm looking forward to diving into some of those things, really getting into this, because as we're entering this season, more people are thinking about comp. And I saw some new research come out today about some of the changes in pay that are happening at for hourly rates for people. So there's so much focus on it right now. And I can't wait to just get into it. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring David in and welcome to the show. Hey, David, good to have you.
Man. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So before we dive into some of the fun things I was teeing up for the audience there, would you take a minute and tell us a little about who you are and what you do, please?
I am a geek when it comes to HR technology, compensation, HR analytics. I live it every day. Knee deep in it right now, neck deep before. My passion is helping companies understand the data and the processes that drive their business. They are not HR processes, they're business processes. And the more we can help the organization that we're working for understand that it's not just what we want, it's not just what we need, but it helps drive the business and helps make people happy to actually work for us. That's my passion, is helping companies see that this is just not about HR. It's about the business.
You know, you said you were neck deep before and you're knee deep now. Does that mean the tide's going out and the waves about to come in and like swamp you? Is that what's going to happen next?
Yeah, well, it's late in the day. So, the tide is actually going out today, right now. But yes, so that's why I get a chance to speak to wonderful people like you, Ben.
Well, you can hold your judgment for just a few minutes till I ask some of the hard questions, and then we can reconvene on that one.
I'll look forward to that.
But one of the things I want to ask you, though, you and I were kicking around this. You've been in the space for many years, right? You admitted it yourself. I'd love to hear from you. In how long have you been around the comp, the HR tech space? And in that time, have things changed? Are we still talking about the same problems? Are we still talking about the same challenges? Or has that morphed and evolved over time?
So it's a great question. I've been in the HR and the HR technology space for over 30 years. And you'd be surprised. A lot of the same things we were talking about 30 years ago, we're talking about now. In the advent of pay equity about 30 years ago, when Canada decided they were going to put in pay equity legislation, and we started looking at using point factor job evaluation to figure out comparable worth. And, that's still, obviously, it's something now that we're taking much more seriously in the US, and we're really looking at artificial intelligence and bots and things to kind of help us with that. But we're still using a lot of the same algorithms and technologies to be able to do those things. So yeah, as much as things change, they kind of come back to where they were in the past. We're still looking at a lot of the same techniques and technologies that we were dealing with 30 years ago. We've modernized them. We've changed them, but the salary surveys are still very much the go-to place to get data. And we need more automation around being able to get that data and be more useful about it today.
Yes, absolutely. The world is moving too quickly to make decisions based on something that happened 18 months ago.
Exactly.
Yeah. I've made that argument for a long time, but now especially it feels even more pressing than it ever did in the past.
Absolutely. I mean, we keep hearing about people leaving and, the Great Resignation, and why. And it's not just about money, but it's about lifestyle and being able to change. We need to be able to react real time to how are we going to deal with this? How are we going to find new people to replace them? And how are we going to entice them to stay and to thrive in our environment, our culture? And you need data for that.
One of the things you said at the beginning that made my heart start beating a little faster is you said, this is not an HR problem, this is a business problem. And I'd love for you to talk about that for a minute, because it's easy for us to get in our very siloed view of the world and say, it's about engagement, or it's about whatever, but I am a big advocate for that. I'd love to hear from you in your words why we should be having conversations about this being a business problem and not coming in there with our HR speak, trying to put our agenda on top of somebody else.
Well, it's actually funny. A lot of the managers who are dealing with people who are leaving, they're kind of pulling their hair out saying, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And the first thing they always do is come to HR and say, how are you going to help me here? And we always kind of do our tried and true thing where we go and we look at market pricing and we see, are we paying people enough and whatnot? And I think we have to actually be honest with the business people and sit down and say, are we fundamentally looking at the problem the right way? Do we need to look at it a different way and actually talk to them about what is it that those people were doing, and are there better ways or different ways of us being able to get that same productivity? And with the gig economy now on not only on the rise, but really it's kind of a pinnacle at where it's been, and with the way people want to change how they work, can we have a conversation with the business and say, can we achieve the things that we were doing before differently, not just keep going back to the same old thing of keep offering people more money to do what they've been doing in the past? Can we partner with the business to come up with a different equation?
What's interesting in our research, we're seeing people are asking for flexibility, but it's not I just want to work from a home office. It's, I just want more say so in how my work gets done. Or I want to say so maybe in the schedule timing or in the flex, like all these kind of things that we can apply flexibility to that are outside the bubble of where you're sitting when you're doing your work. And when I stop and think about that, I haven't thought about it this way before, but you saying that makes me think a lot of those things are things that we can't control, right? None of us in HR can say, wave our magic wand and say, okay, now you can do this. Usually that's a very business centric thing because it's around how we serve customers, how we produce products, how we actually do the business. That's when it starts getting into their lane, and we've got to have their buy-in, their support to be able to make some of those things happen.
And the people who make things happen aren't the executives. They're the people who facilitate getting things to happen. They're the people who are making big decisions about where are we placing money, where the bet's going to be. And if they start listening to their employees, they start listening to the ideas that those employees may have, as you said, very appropriately, it's not just about working from home. It's about taking me seriously. It's about listening to the ideas I might have, that I might actually be able to solve the business problem a little bit differently. I want my voice to be heard. And if I'm not going to be heard here, I want to go to a place that will listen to me. And it's not just about money. In fact, it doesn't need to be about money. Money's the last thing that you should be throwing at this. It's respect. It's an ear. Sometimes it's all about the listening.
Yeah. You said a minute ago, my breath kind of caught for a second. You said it, like, do they care about me? Because every person, whether you intentionally are stopping to think about that, or if it's just happening in the course of your day where it's in the back of your mind just nagging at you, we always want to know the answer to that question. And if it's ever no, one may not be the trigger, but enough of those is gonna say, hey, someone else out there would appreciate this. Someone else out there does want to hear my ideas, to your point. Someone out there does want to hear the things that I have to contribute. And yeah, they'll pay me fairly for them, hopefully. But it's not. There's a great book that I read years ago called The Hidden Reasons Employees Leave or something like that.
Yeah.
And I looked at thousands and thousands of people who had left their jobs, and managers said 80% of this is because of someone's pay. Yeah. And it turns out 80% of the factors, the inverse, 80% of the factors are how they're treated, the culture, right? The work conditions, all these kind of things outside of pay. And it becomes almost like a cop-out to say, oh, well, you didn't approve that budget. You didn't change the pay rate. And so I can't control that as a manager.
How many cop-outs have we heard throughout history about managers when they're sitting down talking about pay raises or bonuses and saying HR didn't allow me to do this or whatever? I've been in the middle of those situations. I've been giving the scripts to people to talk about how, we've been through a tough economic time and we didn't have the funds to do things like this. But managers always go back to what's easiest. It's to blame someone and to be able to, I hate to use the word scapegoat, but to use HR as the crutch to say, they didn't let me do it because they didn't give me the money to do it. Well, in this case, what we really need is we need leaders to step up and lead by listening and by giving people an opportunity to contribute and to feel like they're part of something important. And if you won't, I promise you, they're going to find a place that does. And so you need to be able to get to whether it's a cadence in listening or a technology. Like there are HR systems now that have performance management systems that are kind of more real-time feedback. It gives you an opportunity to have a sit-down conversation, and it kind of gives you a notification to say, have you talked to your employees today? Have you listened to them? What are their priorities? What are the things you can help them with as a leader? And those are good because it gives you an opportunity to get kind of prodded to have the conversations that are necessary to ensure that you are at least listening or having the opportunity to listen, and that's not just a once a year thing.
It's interesting because I get pushback sometimes on that when I say, hey, I don't care if you've got to set a schedule on your calendar to go and do this. It doesn't matter to me. Just do it. Because you're like, well, that feels mechanical. I'm like, I don't care. You're trying to build a habit.
Yep.
Right. When you start trying to, I'm going to go walking every morning, like you pencil that in because you're trying to lose weight. You pencil that in because it's important, because it's a priority. I don't care if you've got to write it down if it feels mechanical, because we're trying to build a different habit than you normally, as you said, that you'll fall back to, right? The easy thing to do is just say, yeah, I don't have time for that. I'm too busy today. I'll get to that next week, next month, next whenever. And by the time you get around to it, the person's gone. You've realized you missed your window.
Right. And the once a year performance evaluation just feeds right into that, because if I'm only listening to you once a year, I'm only giving you feedback once a year, what's the point? We're not in that world anymore. We're in a world where people want to know, and they want to know it now. They don't want to know it in June or in January when they're getting their increases. They want to know now. So you're right. It could be as simple as setting up a time, and it could be as painful as having to talk to people once a week. And I promise you, if you feel that way and you think it's painful to talk to your employees, you're in the wrong job. And you should probably find something a little bit different. Maybe be a librarian where you get to tell people to shush all the time so you don't have to listen to them. Maybe. But no, to your point, the studies clearly say that managers who are ineffective drive people out. And managers who have that ability to listen, or at least have that ability to make that connection, they're the ones that people love working for, and they feel supported by them. And those are the people who are going to stay.
I want to ask you like 15 follow-up questions to that, but I had a couple of specific questions I wanted to make sure we got to in this, because obviously by now everybody listening in is probably making notes like me over here, trying to keep up with everything you're sharing, because I love the ideas here, and you've got some good quotable quotes already. One of the things I want to ask you, though, because you have this interesting perspective where you are talking to a lot of employers, you've been in the space, you've got this amazing depth of experience. What are some of the things that the people listening in right now, HR leaders, talent leaders, some of them may have that responsibility for comp as well, probably wearing that as one of many hats. What are the things that should be on their to-do list or their priority list as we're looking at a new year? What sort of things should be important? And we've talked about a couple of those, and you can reiterate that. I don't mind, but I'd love to hear from you some of the things that should be on that list so that they can get some good takeaways.
First of all, thank you. You said some very nice things there, and I didn't want to let that stuff go. But second of all, I think that we need to get back to hygiene in HR. And what I mean by that is that our processes are kicking out a lot of data constantly, because that's what they do. They're machines. They're constantly churning new information, new insight. But the tables that feed them, the tables that make them correct, whether it's the job table or the termination reasons table or some of those other tables that are fundamental, we need to make sure that we have on our calendar, just like every once in a while, they tell you to change the battery in your smoke alarm. We should have appropriate hygiene set up that at once a year, or maybe even more, we look at those tables, those fundamental underlying tables in our HRMS, to make sure that they're still accurate. Are we calling the job the same thing now? Has it fundamentally changed? I promise you that if the last time you looked at it was 2015, things are different. Even 2019, things are different. And I was looking at the compensation technology buyer's guide that you put out, and one of the things that's striking is there's a gigantic difference in perception between 2019 and 2021. And there's a difference in the market. Jobs are different. And if you haven't taken a look at those fundamental underlying tables between 2019 and 2021, I promise you, things are different. Work is different. The expectations of jobs are different. And so if you look at analytics and you look at this market pricing, and if you're a comp person and you're about to do matching, or I'm sorry, you're going through your year-end timeframe right now, it's maybe not a good time to go through it now. You probably should have done that in September. but set a time frame maybe in a couple months after year ends died down, and sit down, look at the data that underlies your market pricing, your survey matches, your market composites, and look at what's there. Do we need to modernize that stuff? Do we need to look at it a little bit? The work I'm doing right now for clients is really about making sure that all of that data is in order, and then looking at what's going on in the market, because there's this shock that's happened, because 2020 was awful for everybody. It caused some companies not to give increases, some companies to give increases out of, dire necessity.
Mhm.
Some companies didn't give bonuses. And so a lot of organizations are still trying to figure out, where are we in terms of market competitiveness? And so they're taking the opportunity now, whether they're going through a year end or they had just gone through it in the July cycle, to look at the fundamental data underlying all of their analyses, and then looking at their market data and seeing, have things moved significantly? Are there areas of concern that they need to focus on? And then once they have all of that stuff together, set a picture for what 2022 will look like. We've heard a lot of reaction from organizations that are now looking at the CPI and what's actually happening now with prices in the marketplaces, and saying, oh my goodness, we thought 3% would be fine, because 3% was more than what we've done in the last three or 4 years. But now prices are going up by almost 5%. What are we going to do? Do we need to really keep up? And the answer is, you need to do your research. What industry are you in? What markets are you in? Are people moving in? Are people moving out? There are some organizations like ADP and salary.com do a really good job of being able to publish good data about market movements and where are people coming in and going, and that they actually have their fingers on the pulse of what is actually going on with the salary increase budgets in certain industries, and what are you going to need to do to react to it? Because we may actually have to go back to finance and say, we need to look at this again, because prices are going up, our prices are going up, our employees can't be behind, the CPI again.
So
Sorry, that
many.
was a lot there, but
I'm trying to process that and think about, because one of the things I'm going to ask you as you were going through, one of the things I was going to kind of highlight on your behalf is, you talked about the importance of just, I'm going to unplug and step back and get a big picture view of things. Again, I started out the conversation, I think, today saying we get our tunnel vision, and it's not because you don't care. It's because you really care about your job a lot. You're working your tail off trying to make sure I'm doing the things that are within the confines of my job. But one of those things, for those that are out there listening to this, if you can hear my voice, one of the things you're responsible for too is making sure you don't get blindsided by this example, right, of the CPI, or you don't get blindsided by, hey, I heard this resignation thing's going on. You don't want to get blindsided by those things. But so it's so important to step back from the work you're doing day to day, whether it's again, it's once a year, you have a set aside as your own, HR retreat we used to do for my team. We say, okay, what are the things we need to think about for the coming year that or our wish list that we've talked about for a long time? Like, we're going to finally get to that thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm so glad you encouraged them on that front, because it's so easy to keep our head down and keep doing things. And no one's going to say, hey, you did a bad job because you missed that, but we'll know. And I don't want anyone that's listening to this, that's trying to be the great HR pro that they are, to miss out on that chance to keep their organization at the forefront of this and keep their people taken care of. That's what we're the people. They want to take care of their people best. And this gives them a chance to do that by really looking at, paradoxically, data, evidence, what figures are out there to make sure you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. But if they don't set up the understanding that they're in the right place, that they have looked at their data first, and then they've looked outside and said, what's going on out there, then they're on solid ground, because then nobody can challenge them. We know that our data is right. And then we're looking at the stuff externally and we're saying, here's what's happening in the marketplace, and we're applying that to what's happening here. This is what the picture looks like, and it doesn't look very good.
One of the things that you have a wealth of knowledge in is analytics. Fair?
Yep.
Right, that's an area you spend a lot of time. And so I'd love to hear from you, because in general, anyone who's listening that has some responsibility for comp, right? They're usually a little more of a data nerd,
Sure.
right? The data geek, I think was the term you used earlier. Like we're in good company with our fellow nerds and geeks around the data.
Absolutely.
But taking it from, okay, I can look at this and figure out a comp ratio. I can look at this and figure out, 75%, 75th percentile.
Sure.
That's a little different than I'm going to use this stuff to plan and predict and make some forecasts of what could be, what's next. Any advice for taking that leap from just I'm using it for my day-to-day to I'm using this to plan for what's next?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that a lot of organizations like to look at compensation people because we've been the nerds that have been dealing in analytics for decades. And we have already built those skills to understand what do percentiles mean and how do we talk to people about them. One of the keys in analytics is being able to tell stories. And compensation people have some unique skills to be able to tell stories because we are so flush with data that sometimes we have to look at the data and either challenge it or we have to be able to tell the appropriate story about it. And it's not just about the data itself, it's about the context of the data. So compensation people have had to take multiple sources, bring them together, and be able to triangulate to say, this is what's going on, I think, with an asterisk and have all the appropriate assumptions underneath that. And we've built that over many years of being told by managers who live in those spaces, you don't know the market. I know the market. I'm hiring people, blah, blah, blah. Well, you're right. You are living it. What we're trying to do is tell you what's going on with what we see based on what the data is telling us. And here's the story it's telling us. So compensation people have a lot of great background already in storytelling. And in order to be able to start talking about the larger world of analytics that HR is now knee deep in and has gotten neck deep in, if we were using that example from before, is to be able to tell the business a lot more about the health of the business by looking at certain statistics. And unfortunately, what's happened to people analytics is a lot of people have taken it so much to the science side that they've forgotten a little bit about the artistic pieces of it that are necessary, which are to take not just the data that exists, but also the context that exists from the business owners, from the business leaders, from the HR people who live it, and add those things together to be able to tell the story based on what the data is showing. And that's why I think comp people have a little bit of a leg up on this. We've been doing this for years. We've been talking to recruiters. We've been talking to the survey firms. We've been getting the triangulation on the data. And so we have a little bit more background. I'm not saying that the other people don't and data scientists don't. They do. They're brilliant people. But comp people have kind of lived this for a while, not to basically say this is what's happening and be so definite about it without being able to take into context all those other things that are happening in the marketplace from the people we count on. The recruiters, the HR generalists, the leaders, the business leaders, the executives, and being able to triangulate all those things together to tell the right story or tell at least an appropriate story.
I'm thinking we're going to have to invite you back to do an art and science of analytics session at some
Sure.
point, because I think that's a great, I love the idea of taking this thing we think the answer is, well, data, more data, throw all the data in, right? And then go and, well, no, it's partially about understanding the impact and understanding the context and having some awareness. That's one of the things I love talking about and writing about from an AI perspective, is that those tools are really smart and they can do a lot of things. Those algorithms can process a lot of data, but they can't decide, okay, what's the next best step to take? And that's, as you're saying, those of you out there that are HR leaders, that are comp leaders, you have built that muscle through a lot of practice. Often if you have the data in front of you right now, oh, I just got to do this. This is the next best thing to do. But for many of us, we don't have that right in front of us. We haven't taken that time doing the look, as you were saying earlier. And so we're making a judgment based on, well, last year I did this, or I think we should probably, but they're not using the data. And so I love some of the advice you've given today to help really steer them in that direction and make it very practical.
I got to tell you a quick story. I worked
Bring it.
for a CFO who asked me to model the organization from a headcount perspective. And so I did, based on the data I got from the HRMS. And I brought it to him and I showed him this. And there were a bunch of people in the room. And I was called in because when I presented it, I said, "This is what I see." And he said, "Well, your numbers are wrong." And I said, "No, they're not." And then he presented the data from the general ledger. And he said, "No, these are the right numbers. Why are you presenting incorrect data?" And I said, "Well, let me tell you a story. This is the data that we get when we're counting people from the HRMS. The data you have from the general ledger is also correct. My data is correct and your data is correct. And here's the differences between the underlying definitions." And I think the thing that we try and do way too often in HR is to say, "This is it. This is the picture." And goes back to the art and science. A lot of times there are multiple pictures and they're all right. You can take a picture of a statue and in the background you see someone who's fainted. And then you could take it from the other perspective and you can see a beautiful swan taking off and it's gorgeous. Someone is in fear of someone's life being lost and someone seeing this beautiful creature taking off into the wild. Two very different pictures of what's actually happening right now in that area. and what happens is we're seeing it from our perspective, they're seeing it from theirs, and they both look correct. And the answer is they both are correct. We're just seeing it in a different way.
I love it. I'm a sucker for a good story, especially when it comes to this stuff. All right. So
by the way, he didn't love that explanation, but it was right. And his people liked it.
When someone when it's pointed out that maybe you don't have all the answers, especially when you think you do, that's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
So we're getting close on our time here. David, this has been so much fun. I appreciate you for joining us. To everybody out there listening in, I know you've enjoyed it as well. You can connect with David. You can connect with Sarah.com, follow both of them. I'll have their LinkedIn profiles linked in the episode notes for this one, just by the video here. Click over if you're on LinkedIn. If you're not, jump over to LinkedIn, check out the replay, and you can do that as well. David, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate your insights, sir. This has been so much fun.
My pleasure, Ben. Anytime.
Awesome. To all of you out there, thank you for joining us this episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I hope you got some great ideas, some great encouragement, some great insight from this. I know I did. I can't wait to catch you next week on another episode of HR Tech Talks. Have a wonderful rest of your day.